People always assume quiet people are calm, peaceful, maybe even mysterious if they're romantic about it. But if you've ever been the quiet one in a room, you know the truth is rarely that glamorous. Silence isn't always serenity. Sometimes it's armor, thin, polished, and carefully held together so no one sees the mess underneath. Most listeners aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they're thinking too much, feeling too much, or trying not to say the wrong thing. And it's funny, isn't it? People often admire listeners without realizing how complicated that role can be. They say things like, "You're such a good listener," as if it's purely a compliment. But deep down, many listeners know it didn't start as a choice. It started as a survival instinct. Somewhere along the line, maybe during childhood, maybe during adolescence, you learned that talking was risky, that speaking up carried consequences, that when you opened your mouth, the world didn't respond with warmth or curiosity. Instead, it judged, corrected, dismissed, or misunderstood. So you adapted. You learned to make silence your safe place. You watched others speak freely, while you filtered every word through a mental maze. Will this sound stupid? Will they think I'm weird? Will this make things awkward? What if I say this wrong? And before you know it, the moment passes. So you nod, you smile, you listen, and people call you the quiet one, like it's a personality trait, not a shield. But here's the twist that almost no one talks about. Quiet people feel everything intensely. They just express it differently, internally, privately, silently. In fact, the quietest people often have the loudest inner worlds. Memories loop like playlists. Conversations are rewound and replayed. Thoughts stack up like unopened messages. And while the outside world sees your calm, collected exterior, inside, it's another story entirely. This is where the insecurity hides, in the gap between what you feel and what you show. But that insecurity didn't appear overnight. It has roots, it has a backstory, it has a beginning. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Silence doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's learned, it's absorbed, it's shaped long before we realize we're living inside it. For many quiet people, it starts in childhood, those early years when your personality is still a soft, unprotected thing. You probably remember moments where speaking up felt awkward or dangerous. Not because something dramatic happened, but because the room itself taught you how to behave. Maybe you grew up in a family where the loudest voice won, where speaking meant competing, where interrupting was normal and being interrupted was expected. If you weren't built for verbal battles, you learned to step back, to wait for openings that rarely came. Or maybe you had parents who praised you for being well-behaved whenever you stayed quiet. Adults love quiet kids. They call them easy, polite, mature for their age. But children don't realize that this praise often conditions them into shrinking, into equating silence with approval, into believing that making noise equals making trouble. Some quiet people trace it back to school, those first group assignments or classroom discussions where speaking felt like walking onto a stage. And you probably remember watching confident kids raise their hands while your mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made it past your lips. And sometimes the root is far more subtle. Maybe you said something once, an opinion, a joke, a random comment, and someone reacted in a way that branded your brain forever. That was stupid. Why would you say that? No one asked. It takes only one moment like that, especially when you're young, to make you hesitate the next time, then the next, then always. Before long, Staying silent doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like the safest path. And here's the important piece. Quiet people don't usually see this pattern forming. It happens slowly, through tiny experiences that stack up over years. You learn to read the room. You learn to listen first. You learn to observe the energy, the expressions, the tone shifts. You learn to predict reactions before they happen, and the world praises you for it. You're so thoughtful. You're easy to talk to. You're such a good listener. Those compliments feel good at first, but eventually they become a cage, a role you feel expected to play, even if it means hiding everything you don't say. By the time you're older, silence isn't just a behavior. It's part of your identity. People expect you to be quiet, and you expect it from yourself. But here's what no one tells you. Inside all that quiet, there's a superpower, a skill most people overlook, something that comes from all those years of observing instead of declaring. And that's exactly what we explore next. Being quiet isn't just a habit. It sharpens things inside you that most people never develop. While others speak to fill space, you listen to understand it. And that difference creates a kind of silent superpower, one that can feel both natural and heavy, depending on the moment. Quiet people develop an awareness that's almost uncanny. You notice the shift in someone's eyes when they're hiding something. You pick up on tone, the tension in a room, the pauses between someone's words. It's like your mind runs a second track in the background, decoding everything people don't say. Some call it sensitivity. Some call it intuition. But really, it's pattern recognition, born from years of watching instead of talking. You absorb details others overlook, who interrupts who avoids eye contact, who laughs too loudly to mask discomfort. You learn to read energy the way others read headlines. And ironically, this makes people trust you. They vent to you. They confide in you. They feel safe around you because you don't dominate the space. You hold it. But here's the twist most people don't realize. This superpower often comes from insecurity, not confidence. Because when you're afraid to speak, you compensate by becoming good at everything else. Observing, understanding, anticipating. You become the emotional barometer of every room you enter. You know when someone's upset before they say a word. You know when a joke is about to land wrong. You know when someone's mood shifts, even slightly. And you adjust yourself instantly to avoid conflict or awkwardness. It's a skill, yes, but it's also a shield. You learn to listen because speaking feels risky. You learn to read people because you're afraid of being misread. You learn to stay quiet because you've been conditioned to think your voice might complicate things. There's a reason quiet people often become the therapist friend. You've spent your life picking up the emotional slack left behind by louder personalities. But here's the double-edged part. Your ability to understand others becomes a mask, hiding how little you understand about yourself. You're so tuned into everyone else's needs that you often lose track of your own. And that's where the weight of this superpower shows. Being hyper-aware is exhausting. Being the one who gets it is lonely. Being the listener, the observer, the emotional sponge, it takes a toll. But the real battle, the one that happens in the quiet corners of your mind, is something deeper. Because awareness can easily turn into overthinking. And that's where things get tangled. Which brings us to the next chapter. If being observant is a superpower, overthinking is the tax you pay for it. Quiet people don't just think. They rehearse, rewrite, and rerun entire conversations in their heads like they're preparing for a performance no one else even knows is happening. It starts small. You want to say something in a conversation, so you draft it in your mind first. Then you adjust it. Then you check it for possible misunderstandings. Then you soften it so no one gets offended. Then you check if it even makes sense anymore. And by the time you're ready to speak, the moment has passed. This is the loop that shapes the listener identity. Overthinking convinces you that silence is safer than risking a flawed sentence. It's like your brain keeps asking, "What if this goes wrong?" And you answer it by staying quiet. You don't just think about what you want to say. You think about how people will react, how they might judge you, how they might interpret the tone or phrasing. You pre-play every possible outcome until your mind is exhausted. And after the moment ends, that's when the post-game analysis begins. Quiet people replay conversations long after they're over. They wonder, did I sound weird? Did they misunderstand me? Should I have said more? Should I have said less? Meanwhile, the person you're worrying about probably forgot the whole interaction 5 minutes later. This internal pressure builds over time. You start avoiding situations where speaking is expected. You shrink in group discussions because your mind is too busy trying to keep up with the pace. You stay quiet not because you have nothing to contribute, but because your thoughts move too quickly and too deeply for the moment. Overthinking also creates a strange emotional imbalance. You feel things intensely, but express them minimally. You understand others deeply, but reveal little about yourself. You're thoughtful, but your thoughts rarely leave your head. This disconnect is one of the reasons quiet people often feel misunderstood. On the outside, calm. On the inside, a storm. And the more this internal storm builds, the harder it becomes to let anyone in. You fear saying the wrong thing, so you say nothing. You fear being misunderstood, so you stay unreadable. You fear judgment, so you judge yourself first. But here's the most challenging part. Overthinking doesn't just affect how you communicate. It affects your relationships. It affects how people see you, how they treat you, and how much of yourself you allow them to access. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Quiet people don't usually set out to be the safe place for everyone around them. It just happens. Not because you asked for it, but because your silence makes space. Your calm presence settles the room. Your listening creates comfort. And before long, people start treating you like their emotional landing pad. Friends vent to you more than they talk to each other. Strangers open up to you in ways that surprise even them. Co-workers pull you aside for just a minute, which turns into 30. And you're good at it. Not because you trained for it, but because you've spent a lifetime reading people before they even speak. But while the world sees you as the calm one, the grounded one, the one who never needs anything, that image can become its own trap. Because being everyone's comfort zone often means sacrificing your own. You let others talk while you push down what you're feeling. You give support, but rarely ask for it. You listen deeply, but when it's your turn to speak, you hesitate. It's strange how relationships can become unbalanced without anyone noticing. People love you for your quiet presence, but they rarely see the loneliness inside it. When you're always the listener, you end up carrying stories that aren't yours. You hold pain that doesn't belong to you. You become the keeper of secrets, the fixer, the emotional first aid kit. And that role is heavy. Here's the unspoken truth. Quiet people often long to be understood just as deeply as they understand others. They want someone to notice the tiny shifts in their voice. They want someone to ask, "Hey, are you okay?" Not out of politeness, but because they can sense the weight you're holding. But the world rarely notices quiet suffering. Silence looks like strength. Stillness looks like stability. And so people assume you're the one who doesn't need help, because you never complain, never demand, never disrupt. This becomes especially complicated in close relationships. Partners might depend on you emotionally, but never think to check in with you. Friends may overshare without realizing you never share back. Family might treat your quietness as proof you're fine. Meanwhile, you're stuck in a loop of being emotionally available to everyone but yourself. And here's where things turn dangerous. When you never speak up about your needs, people stop remembering you have them. Eventually, this pattern affects more than your relationships. It impacts how you see yourself. You start believing your role is to support, not to speak, to absorb, not to express, to listen, not to matter. But there comes a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, when silence stops being comfort and starts becoming self-sabotage. And that's the next chapter's territory. There's a moment, sometimes a slow creep, sometimes a sharp revelation, when silence shifts from being a shield to being a prison. It happens quietly, almost unnoticeably, because you've lived inside that silence for so long. But eventually you realize your quietness isn't just keeping you safe, it's holding you back. It shows up first in small opportunities, moments where you could have spoken up, where your idea was good, where your opinion mattered. But you stayed quiet, and someone else filled the space. Their words became the conversation, the decision, the outcome, and your thoughts stayed locked inside your head. Then it happens again, and again, until it becomes a pattern. You think, others speak. You feel, others express. You observe, others act. You don't mean to disappear, but silence has a way of making you invisible. In friendships, you hold back the truths you wish you could share. In relationships, you avoid conflicts that needed to be addressed months ago. At work, you fade into the background even when you're capable of leading. And in your personal life, you swallow emotions that slowly turn into resentment, fatigue, or self-doubt. Quiet people often underestimate how much their silence shapes their reality. Because here's the part no one warns you about. When you consistently stay quiet, life doesn't wait for you to catch up. It moves around you, past you, without you. People assume you're fine with every decision because you didn't object. They assume you agree because you didn't speak up. They assume you're passive because you didn't claim your space. And the worst part? You start assuming those things about yourself. You begin believing you're not meant to lead, not meant to express, not meant to take up space, not meant to be heard. And that belief buries itself deep, becoming part of your identity. Eventually, you experience the quiet person's great contradiction. You want to be understood, but you rarely give people the words to understand you. You want connection, but you struggle to show the parts of yourself that create it. You want opportunities, but you freeze when it's time to claim them. And over time, this becomes a form of self-sabotage, not intentional, but impactful. You limit yourself before the world ever gets a chance to. But here's the truth you may not have realized yet. Behind all this silence sits one core belief. The quiet, painful thought that shapes everything, but rarely gets spoken. It's the belief that your voice doesn't matter, that speaking could cause harm, that being seen is somehow unsafe, And that hidden narrative is powerful, too powerful to ignore, which brings us directly into the heart of the story. Every quiet person carries a story they rarely tell, not because it's dramatic, but because it's subtle. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and the whisper goes something like this: "My voice matters less." It's not a sentence people say out loud. It's not even something they consciously think. It just sits there, shaping choices, shaping behaviors, shaping entire identities. Maybe it started with a parent who talked over you. Maybe it started with a classroom where speaking up meant risking a wrong answer. Maybe it started with a friend who laughed at the way you phrased something, or a group where no one noticed when you tried to join in. Over time, you internalize something dangerous, the idea that your words somehow carry less weight than everyone else's. And once that belief settles in, it becomes the silent narrator of your life. It tells you to stay quiet in meetings. It tells you not to bother explaining your feelings. It tells you your needs are too much, your desires unimportant, your thoughts not worth interrupting for. You start convincing yourself that other people are simply better at talking, better at expressing, better at being heard. And when you're surrounded by louder, more assertive voices, it's easy to believe this false hierarchy is normal. But the truth is, it's not confidence that makes people speak. It's habit. And it's not insecurity that makes you quiet. It's conditioning. Somewhere along the line, you learned that your safest moments happened when you said less. You learned that silence kept the peace. You learned that blending in was easier than risking being misunderstood. And so the belief deepened. But here's the part most quiet people never realize. This hidden narrative isn't just false. It's invisible to everyone but you. When people call you thoughtful, kind, observant, empathetic, they're describing strengths you've developed, not weaknesses. But you don't feel strong, not inside. Inside, you feel like someone holding back an entire universe because you're afraid no one wants to hear it. You fear taking up space. You fear being judged for expressing yourself. You fear saying something imperfect. And so you stay quiet, thinking it keeps everything safe. But deep down, you know something's missing. You know there's a gap between who you are and who you show the world. You know your silence is costing you something: opportunities, connections, clarity, confidence. The hardest part isn't admitting all this. The hardest part is believing there's another way to exist. A version of you who can speak without overthinking, express without apologizing, show up without shrinking. And that version of you does exist. But reaching it requires breaking the pattern that's held you for so long. Which brings us to the turning point, the beginning of transformation.